Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second webinar of 2023. This will be the second of a four-part webinar series this year. Today, we are joined by Dan Thornton, Sharif Gardner, and Simon West. Why don't we each introduce ourselves quickly and touch on what experience you have with cyber insurance? Dan, since you're on the left-hand side, would you like to get started?
Cool, thanks, Des. Yeah, I'm Dan Thornton, co-founder and CEO at Goldfish. We are a security awareness training and simulated phishing solution, helping businesses manage the ongoing problem of social engineering and addressing the human element of security. My experience with cyber insurance has really been working with a number of insurers internationally, helping them address this human element with their insureds, helping to de-risk their insureds, their policyholders, and help reduce the risk of the underwriters as well. So we've been working in that space for a little while, sort of understanding how the insurance market operates, what they look for, and how we can help companies become more insurable.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for joining today. Sharif, would you like to go?
Yeah, so you're probably wondering, well, with a job title that has military and law enforcement in it, what on earth do I know about cyber insurance? So I spent 6 years. So currently I work for the SANS Institute as I head up all of our business with defense, military and law enforcement. But previous to that, I spent 6 years in the cyber insurance industry, working in the Lloyd's of London market, but also the US insurance market as well, where I was the head of training and advisory services. And with that, I sort of had 5 strands within that role. And that was overseeing all of the sort of skills training of our underwriters, trying to help them upskill, understand the risk, be able to assess the risk and essentially underwrite that risk. Develop sort of broker engagement initiatives through, training, helping them better consultatively sell the problem and ultimately bring the underwriting firms good risks to underwrite. We then oversaw all of the incident response vendor services. So that would be, when there is a major incident or a minor incident, for example, mobilizing the incident response vendors, so the legal firms, the DFIR firms, and so on and so forth. With that as well, we oversaw the upfront risk management services, so onboarding of vendors to help us reduce that risk up front. And then one of the other areas that was in the later part of my career there was dealing with sort of things like looking at deterministic models, exposure management issues, how, if a systemic event happens, what does that actually look like? And how does that affect our book of business? That's what is known as an insurance. So, it was quite a broad role in the end.
Great. Thanks, Sharif. Thanks for being here today. I appreciate it. Simon, would you like to go?
Hey everyone, yeah, my name's Si West. I'm the Director of Customer Engagement at Resilience. I lead the large-scale engagement projects as well as a high-performing cyber advisory team. My primary focus is building those strong customer relationships and providing that strategic guidance to enhance cyber resilience. My background, I have 8 years security risk management experience. I've been in the insurance market now for the last 5 years, advising underwriters on the complex risks that we see, as well as implementing incident response frameworks. At Resilience, what we do is we assist risk, financial, security leaders on improving their organization's cyber resilience. That solution helps organizations, not always, but at times if they have limited resources, it enables them to facilitate or maximize their cyber investments and effectively manage risks by balancing risk acceptance, mitigation, and transfer strategies in one holistic solution. Thanks to Goldfish for the invite today. Looking forward to joining in on the conversations.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for being here. I'll quickly add a quick fun fact for everyone. So as Sharif mentioned earlier or alluded to, all 3 of our hosts today are veterans, having served in the UK Armed Forces before delving into the murky world of cybersecurity. So yeah, thank you to our expert hosts for taking time out of your day to be here. We look forward to your incredible insights and the advice you're going to deliver on extremely important topics. So welcome to everyone. and welcome to the Cyber Resilience webinar. Let's get started.
Cheers, S.
Let's firstly go over some quick housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded and will be used by the Goldfish team. If you missed our previous webinar, you can find it on our YouTube channel. Feel free to post any questions in the message section, and we'll go over it towards the end of the webinar. And we only assigned about an hour or so for this webinar, so we'll keep things flowing, and we'll cover those questions at the end. Our first webinar is more of a, I want to say, each host had their questions, but today is more of a panel discussion. We'll be covering 3 key topics, namely cyber risk and insurance. What is the right cyber insurance for your organization? And ransomware payments, are they really worth paying? So let's start our panel discussion. Firstly, let's deep dive into what exactly is considered to be cyber insurance, and let's work through a checklist of what exactly it covers. Simon, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I think, just, we have quite a broad audience with us today. So let's just start right back from the beginning. What is cyber insurance? Well, of course, it's a type of insurance policy, and this policy specifically helps organizations and individuals transfer some of the risk of financial losses, liabilities, that may result from a cyber-related incident. So it's designed to protect those businesses and the people against those types of risks. We're talking about things such as data breaches, business interruption, cyber extortion, loss of sensitive information, as well as third-party litigation. I think it's important to know that cyber insurance policies, they do like any other policy. Yeah, they're no different to any other policy in regards to, hey, they have specific terms, conditions, and exclusions. So it's crucial to carefully review and understand the coverages that are provided within that policy. Okay. Different insurers do offer varying levels of coverages. So organizations do need to evaluate their specific needs and risks before selecting a cyber insurance policy. Over the last few years, certainly with the exposure to email compromise, ransomware, the likes of, the baseline of what we call or what we consider to be acceptable in regards to cyber maturity has certainly risen over the last few years, and I think we've plateaued into quite a good space now. But one of the things that we do see, and maybe we can talk about a little bit more about what's changed and what's risen going forward. But certainly one of the things that we do see, it is difficult for businesses to actually, hey, okay, if that's the case, where do we need to be before we go to market? Yeah, how do we make sure that we're cyber ready before we go to market, so we're not wasting time? And I think, one of the struggles there is actually understanding what their own value at risk is. What assets do we have? Where are our assets? How are they secured? And what's the business impact if they are compromised? So that, for me, is the start point.
I think, can I pitch in there, Si, just on that?
Yeah, go for it.
I think exactly as Si says there, is looking at what is the business impact, and effectively that is what cyber insurance is there to pick up. So when your prevention measures fail, your detection measures fail, there are 2 things that cyber insurance will help with. Is one, it's that response mechanism. It's being able to respond should you have a data breach issue where you've actually got to notify hundreds of thousands, if not millions of customers potentially. It's that response element to that. But then also the recovery from that, because if you take, and just as a data breach example, as an example there, you've got, how do I actually respond to be able to notify all those customers that their information has been breached? number one. And then number two, how do I recover from the financial impact of what that's going to cost me as an organization? And that could be in regulatory fines and penalties. And, admittedly, the laws are very different, whether you're in Europe versus the US. But ultimately, where insurable by law, for example, a cyber insurance cover policy will pick up the cost of that. So that will help an organization recover. So that's very much a third-party component to cyber insurance. You've then got the first-party component, which are those, exactly as Simon mentions there, it's the business email response, business email compromise issues. It's that cleanup issue of around that. Before it doesn't necessarily mean that a payment needs to actually be paid to a victim organization. It's actually the cleanup, because there has been a malicious breach of some sort on the network. So it's those cleanup, those first-party costs that are around that. The ransomware issue, and then I know we're going to talk about the payment of ransoms, but it's dealing with that first party incident response. When you need the Ghostbusters to come and help you when you're in your problem, that's where the cyber insurance industry that's where cyber insurance comes in, and effectively it's picking up all of those costs, those first
and
party.
Guys, and just a question for both of you. I mean, the more mature organizations, more mature markets get this. They understand this. Everything that you're talking about is very clear to your risk managers and the guys in the large organizations. But your small and your medium-sized businesses, even, they may be under the assumption that, well, I've got business insurance already. I don't know why I need this additional. Is there an education gap there? Is there an awareness gap there? How are you guys finding that? There is certainly still a large part of the market that there's this false assumption that I'm covered. I've got business insurance. I'm all good. Who's covering that awareness gap? Who's covering that education gap to the small businesses, teaching them about the need for cyber insurance, because they're actually not covered under their normal policies?
No, I think just to jump in there, I think just to go back to your very first point around the larger businesses, I think there are definitely people within those organizations that do get cyber insurance. Of course they do. They're purchasing cyber insurance. We know that. However, we still, time and time again, especially within the security, and I sat and listened to and spoken to many CISOs within organizations, and they have been talking about the same thing for the last 20 odd years, and they're still talking about it today. Okay, and that is, we're still struggling to communicate with the board. And my question is, well, okay, so are we going to keep on doing the same thing and expect a different result? And the answer to that is, well, no, we shouldn't be doing that. So we're looking at, well, what can we do to help break down those communication barriers between security, risk, finance? Okay, they should all be communicating with each other. And that's why, no longer is it just, is risk transfer alone enough for these organizations. The risk transfer really needs to be tied into them understanding what the value at risk is, tying it into, hey, what are we willing to accept? And remember, when you're saying we're willing to accept a risk, you're basically telling the finance, the money people, that they're willing to pay for that out of the treasury if something goes wrong. And that's not always the case. Okay, so it is really, we're trying to break down those barriers. How can we communicate what needs to be done on a mitigation, transfer, acceptance wise across the board?
I think, yeah, and I think when it comes down to tailing that into the small businesses, I mean, there's two. I mean, first and foremost, the small business needs to speak to its broker. Speak to your broker if you have an insurance broker, for example, and then that broker should be able to link up with a specific specialty insurance broker in the cyberspace. But I actually think there's a lot more that things like the small business federations can do. There's a whole load of Chamber of Commerce. You've got now, certainly in the UK, you've got initiatives like the resilience centres, for example. They all have a duty to play in helping small businesses understand this. Small businesses have another challenge on their hands. They will have sort of the devil and the angel on their shoulder, turning around and saying, well, actually, you don't need cyber insurance because we've got our firewalls, we've got our AV, we've got the MFA in place, we've got all of those gadgets in place to prevent you from having a cyber attack, and we can detect them and kill it off early. But the problem is what they aren't able to communicate, because they don't know it, in my opinion, in many instances, and it's not a disrespect to them, they are very focused on the control side, is what happens if and when that all goes wrong? What happens if they are the ones that get that suffer a major incident? Your managed service provider, your IT service provider, and they've got 150 clients servicing small businesses. How are they going to help you as a small business get back up and running? So the education gap has to come from, I think, just not just the brokers, not just the insurance industry, but actually, like I said, some of these, the Chamber of Commerce, you've got your federations, things like that can help, that businesses are signed up to.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think the other thing is we see a lot of the reporting that we listen to or we hear is focused on the larger organizations. So there's a tremendous amount of underreporting that's happening, within the small, medium to business sort of areas, that people and businesses just aren't aware, just how prolific, this threat can be. It's just as prolific as any other, which of course that leads to complacency. All being former military veterans here, the old saying goes, complacency kills. I mean, it sounds a bit drastic, okay, but it absolutely does. Within the cyber realm, complacency can lead to all sorts of problems, if not dealt with.
Sorry, I've just got one little story there, actually, when you talk about the complacency side and just dealing with an incident response, for example. And this is where cyber insurance sometimes unfairly can get a bit of a bad rep when it deals with the incident side. So forget what we can talk about, we can go down the rabbit hole of, well, cyber insurers aren't there to pay and blah, 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 blah. Having been in that industry, and so I can say this as well, is, it absolutely is there to pay the claims that it's covering for. But, for example, on an incident side, we dealt with a small organization. Doesn't really matter what they did, but essentially they're a small organization and they used a managed service provider, for example, to manage their IT services. This small organization got hit with a ransomware attack. I think the ransom demand was around about £1 million, something along those lines. Anyway, when it came to investigation, cyber insurance policy kicked in. So the cyber insurance response services kicked in. So, they went to their panel of response providers, picked a response service there. The digital forensics response was, having to trawl through the logs of activity, and, effectively the managed service provider monitoring that organization's network had only kept the logs on default, for example. So default logs were kept for 10 minutes. So that means that basically all activity on that network was only stored for up to 10 minutes, which was a default position, a default setting with that firm. Well, that's no good when you're dealing with a forensics incident. So then you end up with a blame game between the forensics firm and the victim company, because effectively costs are now starting to mount because they can't recover their data. So I think it's just some of that complacency can sit in everywhere, and I wouldn't even call it complacency in some respects. It's just a case of not really understanding those measures that they need to take in order to implement. Anyone can tick a box and say, yep, we're doing this, and this. But actually doing the doing, and it does cost money to do that. You have to have people to be able to do that, people who know what they're doing, rather than just trusting that the technology is going to save you and prevent all of these things happening.
No, that actually, Sharif, leads into sort of quite a good point, which is, the vendor panels that, as part of your policy, you will have access to that incident response, vendor panel, which will have law firms, digital forensics, crisis communications, discovery tools and mechanisms on there, you know, credit monitoring, ID and theft credit monitoring. All of these, you know, services there to help the insureds have that more timely, you know, effective response. However, you know, like in the situation that you just mentioned there, you know, from time to time, we do deal with businesses that decide, hey, we want to use this firm or this firm, and going off panel can actually lead to some difficulties. And we see this time and time again. Hey, they're not used to working with the insurance market. Rates are higher, so they don't get the preferential insurance rates. We see scope of work creep, where they, you know, all of a sudden a huge invoice comes in at the end of the day, a client attorney privilege that's lost, all because they're just not working. You know, we always say, look, try and stick to the vendor panel. They're there for a reason. These experts are there dealing with business email compromise. They're dealing with extortion events on a daily basis. They are the best. Yeah, please, if you do you know, always stick to the panel. It will save you a lot of time and heartache going forward.
So, Sai, how is that working then? If obviously, you know, if we're taking out cyber insurance and we're going to have our costs covered, our, you know, legal costs and forensic costs and getting backup. If we're going off panel, if we're using vendors outside of your recommended vendors and we're choosing, are you still covering that regardless of the cost? I mean, if we're racking up, you know, 10x more in expenses because we're going off panel, are you going to cover those 100%, or is that keeping your policyholders to your panel only, and that's why you do that?
I mean, look, different insurers will have different policies in regards to, you know, how they manage the vendors, whether they're on or off panel. So I think, you know, there's going to be variations within that. What I would say is, yes, you know, we've already discussed the problems of if you're going off panel, increased costs and other issues. What I would say, though, is one of the things that we do with our insureds is we'll run them through an onboarding call, okay? And we do this so that they have a firm idea of what the coverages they have, what their limits are, and any other details around their policy. And I think if you're using off-panel vendors and you're experiencing increased costs, like you say there, you probably stand a higher likelihood of blowing through your coverages sooner than if not. Okay, so you're going to eat into that coverage a lot quicker than if you were using the insurer's vendor panel. So yeah, an onboarding call is something that we'll run for our insurers. We'll run through all the policy information. We'll introduce them to the claims team, the security engineering team, and our customer success team. So if they do have any questions or issues, then they have someone to sort of go to there. We'll run them through a ransomware walkthrough where we will highlight on some of the key vectors and some of the mitigation controls around that. And that's where we sort of introduce them to the portal that we have. So as I said, we're in the business of risk transfer, but we also want to provide our insureds with additional tools to make them more cyber resilient. So cyber resilience is, hey, look, you know, there's going to be a point in time where we're likely to have an incident, a serious incident, but we need to be able to continue to maintain business continuity and still add value to our customers. Okay, not sat there wondering, what do we do now? We don't have a plan. We don't have enough coverage, and we're going to go under in 2 weeks if we don't get this sorted. Okay, so these are all the questions that we ask before the time of the incident. We onboard them onto our portal, which provides them with continuous monitoring. Okay, so continuous monitoring, we build up an internet footprint of our customers. It's all open source, so it's nothing offensive at all. This is designed to sort of help them and understand where they are in regards to their maturity, and we provide them with relevant notifications. Okay, so notifications that are specific to them. There's lots of vulnerabilities and exposures out there, but actually bombarding customers with a whole bunch of noise adds little or no value. It's, you know, the old adage, Sharif, I know you're familiar with this, prevention is great, but monitoring without a response adds little or no value. So we like to provide them with the tools so that they are able to respond to relevant notifications. Okay, is it actually out there in the wild being used? You know, are we seeing it live? You know, these actual attacks happening within that vulnerability. Is there a strong set of remediation and recommendations out there for this vulnerability? And we see this all the time. You know, information being put out to the market. Hey, you know, be aware of this. Well, that's great. Okay, but if you're not going to provide them with the tools to, one, help themselves, then there's no point in putting it out there in the first place. And believe it or not, that happens a huge amount of the time, especially on the social media. It adds no value to the customers or the market. You know, we need to see those strong recommendations. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. I think that was a great introduction to the rest of the webinar, and really into our second topic here, which Simon and Sharif really introduced well, is that with any insurance policy, there's obviously it's critical for policyholders to understand the limitations of their insurance. So now that we understand what cyber insurance is and what it covers, it begs the question of what doesn't it cover?
And Si, yeah, just kicking off this one quickly, you know, you mentioned how yourself and other insurers and other companies will really take on your policyholders and do an onboarding with them, and like that's great. You know, I get to learn all about what you cover. But if I'm shopping around, if I'm a small business and I'm shopping around trying to find out, obviously I can go onto the websites and the rest of it, but where am I getting that detailed information from? If I want to find out what is covered, what's not covered, what do I need to do? Can I get that off websites? Do I need to talk to brokers? Are they going to have this information, or do I need to be getting on directly with the insurance companies to do something sort of before the onboarding, before I've made my decision? How, as a small business, how am I making my decision on what insurer to go with?
No, yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, it's a broker conversation. So within the market, you have the brokers, you have the underwriters, and the first point of call for businesses will be establishing a relationship with a broker of their choice. The broker of their choice, you know, they are risk managers, risk experts within cyber themselves, and we partner with a number of brokers. And that would be the first protocol. You know, they will help the insured and identify the insured's needs as close as possible related to sort of their operations, and they'll provide them with, you know, a number of options, a number of policies that they can then talk through and decide you know, which one would be preferential for them. At that point in time, you know, we can get brought in to have a conversation with the insured. If they say, hey, we quite like the look of this solution, but we'd like a little bit more detail around the portal and what it actually does. Because, you know, we hear a lot about monitoring, but actually, is it just one point in time snapshot, or is it actually continuous? And they're the sort of questions that we have our security engineer advisory team for, to sort of jump on a call and work with our brokers, work with our broker partners, and work with the insureds to provide them with the right information.
I think typically as well for sort of micro enterprises, certainly in the UK and the US, you know, where the markets are more mature, you know, there are basically, you can effectively almost click, you know, go online and click for some insurance and you'll get it. But the most important thing to do is to do your research. You know, look at the companies that have put the blogs out there that are clearly explaining how they service small businesses, because for some, sorry, for a lot of organizations, you know, they will have a broker. Micro enterprises, yeah, it's a bit like buying your small business cover. Effectively, there will be organizations out there where you can buy cover online, but obviously it's important to do your research and really look at what it is that they're covering and whether that's fit for you. If you're a small business, for example, that's taking credit card payments, you know exactly, you have a liability there to protect, you have a responsibility to protect that data. You know, everybody has the risk of business email compromise. You know, there isn't a company on the planet, no matter what size, that doesn't have that as a risk. So you want that almost as a coverage. Your ransomware, you know, the whole "it will never happen to me" attitude, when it does happen, and you know, we've seen it happen to conglomerates and we've seen it happen to micro enterprises, extremely nondescript businesses. You know, you want to make sure that you can go to an organization that will provide you with that cover, because they're almost your standards in my opinion. Third party loss as well. You want your network services liability. So again, most of these small organizations are using outsourced IT providers. So you want to make sure that that's within your cover. So what doesn't it cover then? What typically does cyber insurance not cover? Well, ultimately, you know, it's the areas that it struggles to model. And I think that's the thing that the organizations need to understand, that look at it through the insurer. They're looking at things that, what's a systemic risk event that's going to really cripple the entire industry? Well, that would be a warlike act, or that would be something like a major nation state level attack, which, you know, without going down that sort of rabbit hole, but Lloyd's of London have got some exclusions in play, which in some respects haven't been quite clear to many of the organizations purchasing that cover. But the reality is it's there to pay claims that it is covering. Things like IP, you know, what does the cost of someone's IP to the business? You know, if you lose your secret sauce recipe, how do you actually quantify what the potential long-term impact of that? So that's still quite a nascent area. And then you've got the cyber physical risk. You know, as you can start to see, there's a lot of, you know, the merging between cyber and physical systems, IoT, you know, Internet of Things systems, you know, that sort of thing. A great example, smart motorways. So in the UK, we have smart motorways. You know, you have a data feed that will then determine the speed at which you can travel on the motorway. Well, what happens then when that starts to cause car accidents? Is that a cyber issue? Is that a physical issue? You know, and these are just some of those mergents there. You know, these are some of those problems really that the industry is still trying to solve. But typically speaking, for small businesses, it is a very well trodden path. It is a very, very good coverage for those small businesses that you know, and it has seen many incidents that it can deal with it.
And Sharif, if I'm shopping around, if I'm trying to find insurance that's going to suit my needs as a small business, do I need to specifically ask if they cover, or is there going to be a list from the insurers of what they don't cover? Are they going to highlight that, or am I only going to find out that the hard way when I find that I'm actually not covered for it and I didn't ask the correct question in the beginning? Is that in the policy? Is they going to cover somewhere in the policy of listing, actually we don't cover that, or you need to ask, or you need to bolt that on? How does that actually look?
Yeah, so typically speaking, a policy will come with what it covers, and then it will come with its clear exclusions. Now, there are policies. So, for example, post the big game ransomware environment, where ransom criminals were charging, you know, huge sums of money in terms of to release their data in terms of ransoms. You know, there's probably been a shift by some insurers to have that as an additional coverage. So you have to buy that coverage as a bolt-on, for example, or they'll sub-limit the coverage. So, for example, they'll only cover up to the limit of, you know, a set amount within the policy, which comes back to a little bit with what Si was saying earlier in terms of, you know, whether you go on panel or off panel for a vendor. Remember, you've got a set limit of coverage, whether that's $500,000, $1 million, $10 million, what, you know, whatever your risk is in terms of what it is that you wish to purchase, you will have a set limit of coverage. The quicker you burn through that coverage, you then become uninsured beyond that coverage, if that makes sense. So so it's quite important to understand that yes, on the policy it will clearly state what you are covered for and what you're not covered for. You know, there are a plethora of sort of resources out there which will tell you all of much of what we've spoken about there, what, you know, what the maximum amount of coverage in terms of what you could get, and then look at it from a small business. But remember, you're going to pay for that. You're going to pay for each area of coverage that you have. So you want something that will have not just the bare bones, but actually what is directly related to you, you know, and that is exactly that. It's that cyber crime fraud element, the business email compromise. Every single small business has that as a risk. It's the privacy liability breach. I'm not saying every single business has that as a risk in many instances, because most of them, you know, a lot of businesses are just focused on the first party. So do you really need that coverage? And if so, you'll need to have that. It's the extortion component. Yeah. Sorry.
No, sorry. Yeah, again, it comes down to those businesses having a base understanding of what their cyber value at risk is. For example, you know, we service primarily the mid-market, so that's a revenue of 75 million all the way up to 7.5 billion. Okay, that's not going to be suitable for a lot of micro, small, and businesses. As I mentioned, you know, it's no different to any other policy. You know, it is important, vitally important, to review those terms, conditions, and exclusions of the policy. You need to make sure that you do understand those specific limits, the limitations, and the coverage is provided. And I think, you know, consulting with your insurer or your broker to clarify any of those uncertainties can ensure that you are working towards that adequate coverages for your specific needs. I think, you know, as I mentioned before, onboardings really do help this. You know, you don't want that policy to be put on the shelf, sat collecting dust. Okay, the cyber policy, you can't do that with a cyber policy. Otherwise, you are going to come stuck pretty quickly during that time of an incident. I think what the idea is, hey, look, as an insurer, you know, our goal really is to build the trust, build trust with the business. You know, make them a better risk, not before the policy, or maybe if we can, and that works great, not in 12 months time, but actually in a dynamic fashion. Okay, so we want to be able to help businesses throughout that policy. Hey, look, as your maturity is improving, we are going to offer you better coverages. We are going to increase your extortion amount. And we're looking to do that, you know, we're looking to partner with our insurers rather than be that, that outside have that more the security, typical traditional security relationship where they're going in and telling businesses, hey, you need to do this, when they have little knowledge of their organization and how they operate. I think we go in there from top down and we partner with them to understand what their needs are, rather than going in trying to force what we want to do on them, and help them navigate the fear, uncertainty, and doubt within the market. You know, there's a lot of FUD out there in the market, and it's confusing for businesses. Hey, actually, we're not sure what we need. We think we need this, this, and this, but actually they don't really know. And again, that comes back down to, hey, well, we just don't really understand, you know, what our value at risk is and what we need to do in regards to prioritization on the mitigation side. If you can't get that right, you're never really going to truly understand what that residual risk is that you'd like to transfer over to an insurance policy.
So, I mean, compared to your sort of more traditional business insurance, or even more traditional insurance, whether, you know, people's experience of insurance has been, you know, car insurance, medical insurance, you know, house insurance, the cyber insurance market is very unique and very advanced, and actually quite different to that traditional market, and where you guys are taking a much more hands-on approach to really coaching and helping and guiding and being part of the solution, as opposed to just underwriting risk that so many other insurance markets do. And do you see that progressing and becoming more that way? Is it, you know, are insurance, your cyber insurance solutions, are they looking to become that sort of all-encompassing cyber in a box solution, come to us for one solution?
Well, I think, you know, and I think Sharif will agree on me on this. I know for a fact it wasn't like go back 6 years, you know, and it was like traditional insurance. You know, we were involved in, you know, one of the first sort of teams to actually add that security element to the underwriting team, or that risk advisory element, should I say, because that's what it is. And now we have definitely seen that evolve within the market. And, you know, there's good and bad out there. You see the long list of consultancy services that really, in my own opinion, add little or no value to the insured, because they are still trying to understand what it is they need. They need help prioritizing what they need, not throwing a long list of risk management services. So I think, yeah, although, you know, they are trying to do something, it may not be the best solution. I think for the insured, you know, the investing in that proactive risk prioritization does pay off in the long term. I think, you know, that can include things like security awareness training, for one. I think that's something that can not always, but in my own opinion, it's one of the most valuable sort of tools to an organization. I think cyber is, you know, there is massively a human problem, or there's certainly a significant human element to cyber, whether it's on the criminal side or as an organization, the people that are protecting the organization and our employees. So training and awareness is vital. I mean, if we look at the two key attack vectors that we see today, you're probably not going to be surprised, or you might be, but it's email and exposures. So still those two, remote access exposures. So, and you think, well, actually, when you look at those two things, one of them is actually people doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing, and the other one is maybe people unintentionally or misconfiguring or not reconfiguring at all that they should have. So, yeah, training and awareness is certainly something that I consider to be important.
I think the difference between this risk and any other risk is that it literally touches absolutely everything. You can leave your car on the drive and have zero risk to your motor insurance policy for that day. There isn't a moment that we aren't online. As soon as we're online, from a business that we live online, work online, shop online, play online. So we every single day we carry this risk. Not only do we carry this risk, you look at the electric vehicle market, that's no longer just purely a motor problem. That's now a computer problem. It's a software issue. It's a cyber issue. The same with the maritime space. You know, you have a look at more autonomous shipping, that side of life. There is a cyber risk component to every single aspect of this. And I think, yeah, to sort of echo Si's points, there's three areas in which that cyber needs to really touch and focus on, and that is, one, the leadership element. The leadership element is if you're a business leader, it doesn't matter whether you're a small micro enterprise business leader or whether you're, you know, a Fortune 100 executive, you have to understand the problem. You have to understand cyber and the language enough, because when the engineering teams, the chief security officers, are asking you for budget, you need to be able to understand what they're asking it for, what they're asking for it, and why. So that's one layer. The second, well, it's not even a layer; it's almost a triangle. The second is your engineering teams, your cyber security teams themselves. You know, there is a renowned global shortage of cybersecurity skilled professionals. That's part of my day job now, is to improve that globally and help upskill nations in terms of trying to make sure we have enough cybersecurity doers, engineers within the teams to be able to actually implement the controls, implement the strategy, implement culture and all that sort of stuff. And then the final layer, it's not even a layer, it's the final piece in the triangle, is the end user. Every single end user has a stake in this. And this is where exactly that, like we talk about cybersecurity awareness, the phishing simulations, 99% of attacks, I don't know what the exact data is at the minute, you know, all start with a phishing email. So, you know, being able to actually understand, but also keep on with that, because you will get fatigue. You will get fatigue in this. As soon as we get a lull within the battle, excuse the military term, but we get the lull within the battle where cyber attacks are down because security controls are up, guess what? Budgets start to shrink. As soon as budgets start to shrink, attacks come up because security controls are down. And this will be the cyclical nature of cyber. And it's a forever problem. You know, it's not going away anytime soon. As long as we have the internet, as long as we have computer systems, as long as we have software, we will have this challenge on our hands.
Yeah, I think, you know, there is no sort of silver bullet for sort of any organization, and the search for that perfect security is unrealistic. And, you know, organizations can find themselves wasting a lot of time and money investing in tools and controls that actually turn out to add no return on investment. And that's particularly dangerous, you know, when it comes to the case of the smaller organizations, as we were talking about earlier, like you said there, Sharif, you know, they actually just struggle to find that kind of investment in the first place. I think, you know, if you're going to break it down, you could say, hey, look, firstly, I keep talking about, hey, understand what your own value at risk is, okay? How much you're willing to tolerate and how much capital is needed to mitigate the cost, to cost of a potential business interruption around those assets. And I think, you know, secondly, you know, developing, you know, having some type of monitoring, you know, no matter how large or small your organization is, I think, again, this is one of the reasons, again, why we have the monitoring, to help those smaller organizations, and that, you know, as well as identifying the possible threats among your third parties, that you're operating with, and within your supply chain, you know, up and down your supply chain. You know, are we doing business with people that have the same sort of cyber maturity as us? If not, what could the impact of a supply chain incident be for us? And I guess, you know, again, I've talked about this before, but like, don't be complacent, you know, assume that eventually there will be some type of serious incident, and then find ways to transfer the cost of that when it arrives within your policy, within your coverages.
I want to answer the questions there that you had up just briefly. What was the previous one? So I can quickly go through that. I want to tackle this. What are the potential implications of not having cyber insurance in place? Quite frankly, and Si can absolutely back me up on this, because we dealt with you know, many incidents across small and large organizations. You know, I don't want to dilute this or scare anybody, but quite frankly, you know, your business could go under. That is the reality when you're dealing with a cyber incident potentially. So not having this stuff in place, you know, when your prevention measures have failed and your detection measures have failed, who's going to respond for you? Who is going to help you get back up and running when you need to? And that is some of the potential implications. Yeah, you know, 99 times out of 100, you may not suffer an incident because the prevention and the detection measures worked. But that one time that you do, essentially, potentially, that's where cyber insurance is there. And, you know, look, it's always an elephant in the room. Let's be quite frank. No one likes insurance. We know we don't like buying it, you know. We all hate it until the day we need it. And guess what? It's always expensive until the day you need it. And I think that's the reality of cyber insurance. And I don't think the cyber insurance industry is looking for sympathy in that case, but it is there to pick up the pieces when it all does go wrong.
And on that as well, Sharif, is that a lot of companies who have been lucky enough not to experience an attack or an incident to date, there's this perception that, you know, it's it's a ransomware. I need to pay a ransom, and that's my only financial burden. And maybe I should get insurance to be able to pay the ransom for me. But there's so many other financial implications as well, whether it is public relations, whether it's legal fees, whether it's regulatory fines, whether it's forensics, whether it's replacing all of your IT equipment because it's all been wiped out. There's so much more that an insurer can help with, in addition to just that ransom. A lot of people think, you know, they completely miss it.
Correct. Exactly that. Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I agree with all of that. I think the other thing is, like, take one step back. You know, first thing is you should be asking yourselves, do we have a plan? Okay, do we actually have a plan to deal with these situations? Because if you don't have a plan, the likelihood is you're not managing your risk adequately, and you're not even thinking about insurance. And if you are, then you need to be asking yourself, you know, who's accountable, you know, during that time of crisis? Who has authority to do what? Who are the vendors that we're going to work with, the law firms, the forensics? And if we're gifted a panel, you know, from our insurer, then again, this is what we do in the onboarding. But hey, establish the relationships with your panelists, build them into your incident response plan. Okay, understand, you know, what understand, you know, how much is it going to cost you? Okay, what is your recovery time objective? What is your maximum tolerable downtime? That means, hey, how much time can we take out, downtime can we take out before we suffer financial, financially, we're just unable to continue to operate. Okay, weigh those two off against each other. Okay, that should always be the first thing. Okay, what is our plan to sort of deal with this? And insurance should fall into that. Okay, in fact, insurance, the mitigation, and your acceptance of what it is you're going to do during these times of crisis. I mean, ultimately, if you're not doing this, you will, you know, you can lose your business. Okay, it's not unheard of, and I know that sounds absolutely drastic, but there's a stat out there somewhere of, you know, 40% of businesses that have been hit with an extortion, a ransomware incident, you know, fail after this first 6 months after that. So, you know, it's have a plan.
You want to fire through some of the other questions? Yes.
Absolutely. I just want to add to those stats that I just mentioned. Is there was a report released last month by Cybersecurity Ventures that projected that the cost to the world for cybercrime is going to be $10.5 trillion US by 2025, and that's just backed up again by Verizon, who state that human error accounts for up to 98% of successful attacks. But with this question specifically, I think it can be dissected in multiple ways. But for the purpose of this panel discussion, Simon and Sharif, would you mind addressing this from a cyber insurance standpoint? And then Dan, would you mind giving your insight from a SAT standpoint?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, just before you guys kick off there, I'd like you guys to also just chat about, you know, being insurable or being less risky. If I'm looking as a customer, if I'm looking to buy insurance, is it going to, you know, the more effort I put in, the more budget I spend in making myself more insurable, making myself less risky, reducing my cyber risk before coming to you, what are the implications of that? Am I going to get more affordable insurance? Am I going to, you know, is it going to be more expensive for me? Am I going to be denied insurance if I come to you as a huge risk? I mean, what are you guys looking for? And how does it benefit me as the customer to actually come to you a little bit better prepared?
I think that's one for Cy, because this is exactly what these guys are doing.
No, exactly that. I think, you know, we as we were talking about earlier, you know, the baseline of what is considered acceptable within the market has risen over the last few years. Unfortunately, what that means for a number of businesses is that they are now uninsurable. Okay, so, you know, that's, in our opinion, that's not acceptable. Okay, we need to be sort of helping businesses wherever they are on their journey, and that's something that we aim to do. We look at it as, you know, your risk is our risk. So our proprietary technology and everything that we do allows us to sort of interact with those businesses that are less mature, that are struggling to get insurance elsewhere, and we partner with them. And not only do we partner with them, we will assign them with security engineers to work with them to improve their cyber maturity throughout the policy. And the incentive for them to do that is that, hey, well, guess what? Actually, we have a sublimit of, you know, 100,000 or 250,000 pounds for extortion. However, we offer them a cyber action plan, which is a prioritized cyber action plan, which will provide them with a return on investment. It will provide them with a cost benefit analysis. It will provide them with an impact analysis of saying, hey, this is where you currently are. At this point, you stand 40% chance of blowing through your coverages over the next 3 years. Finance thinks, I don't like the sound of that. Risk is thinking, I don't like the likelihood of that either. And security is thinking, what controls do I need to implement to make this happen? And we say, hey, this is what you need to do. So we're breaking down those silos between all three of them. We provide them with a loss exceedance curve, which essentially provides them with all that information so that they can actually action, they can put these actions together throughout the policy. Then once they hit these actions, we can say, excellent, we're really happy with this. We're going to increase your extortion up to £5 million.
Yeah, I think, and I think Dan, sorry, just quickly on that as well, is I think, you know, one thing that the audience probably should be aware of is in many instances, I think cyber insurance has now had its seatbelt moment. And what do I mean by that? It means that, you know, in the motoring world, you know, before the seatbelt, you know, deaths from motoring accidents were extremely high, and then you implement the seatbelt, and you know, and that almost has become a major mitigating control. And in some respects, it would be a bit like the sprinkler system within a building. You know, fire would rip roar and damage through the building, where, you know, you implement the sprinkling system and it mitigates and reduces that impact considerably. You know, cyber insurance is going through that at this moment in time, you know, and there are some specific controls. I know, for example, that the industry typically, and I'm not saying every insurer is the same, but I know that typically across the board, you know, multi-factor authentication is one. You know, encrypted offline backups or encrypted off-site backups is another one. You know, that reduces your ransomware risk. So it's, again, you're looking at those prevention controls and those response and recovery controls. I mean, they're just two typical examples. You'd have to do your research. You'd have to speak to your brokers to be able to work out exactly what they would be looking for. But there's your two typical controls, for example, which are absolutely critical to an organization.
Awesome, Buzz. And do you see those controls, or do you see them as the sort of, you know, the insurance industry has identified their silver bullets for this year, and do you see that changing each year as things change? Are they going to identify their next list of controls that they really want to see, or do you think that's going to be pretty stock standard for the next few years ahead, or is it always changing and they're always updating their list of controls that they want to see implemented?
I mean, I don't think they move like a kids' football match and just follow the ball wherever it goes, if that makes sense. But I do think there are certain things where, you know, you're not there to design out all risk, but if you can design out all basic risk, if that makes sense, and, you know, these are your most simple controls to put in. Different insurers will have a different appetite towards this. And quite frankly, as the risk evolves and changes, you know, we already saw that with the implementation of MFA as a specific control that all insurers want to see. What do we start to see? You know, a considerable amount of MFA bypass attacks. We're always going to see that. And I think, you know, cars are safer today than they've ever been historically. And that's not just because of one specific control, i.e. the seatbelt. You know, it's evolved over time. And I think as networks evolve over time, as the rise of cloud computing and all of these other, technology growth factors that implement our cyberspace, so that make up cyberspace, I think we will start to see more and more controls. But I don't think they'll be at a point where it's, too cost prohibitive to an organization to be able to implement.
Dan, how do you see this from a SAT standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, like Sharif mentioned, there's a very key element of controlling risk and managing risk in organizations of all sizes, and in addressing that human element. As a huge part of the risk being faced is being introduced by humans, whether it is insider threats, whether it is human mistakes, whether it's just a lack of awareness at the board level all the way down to the bottom. So companies need to address it, and through education that they can help de-risk themselves, and it's definitely something that a lot of cyber insurers are looking for, and it's a question being asked. So for sure, I mean, it formed part of that list of essential controls that a lot of companies are wanting to cover, and a lot of insurers are wanting to see and even offering as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. These controls are, a good baseline, and I'm not going to read off a whole list of sort of controls and measures that businesses should put in, because that's not the problem. I think it's when they're not actually cyber ready, let's call it that, for the market, and they really need their insurance, and actually they've been sent away, come back in 6 months, come back in 12 months. That's not very helpful for businesses. I think we're looking to sort of meet those businesses where they are on their journey, provide them with a solution that they can work towards that better cyber maturity, accompanied by a policy.
Let's dive a bit deeper into that. Is there an insurance solution for these high-risk companies?
Well, yeah, I think that's exactly what we've just been talking about. I think that's exactly we meet businesses of all shapes and sizes, all different levels of maturity. But for those that are lacking in regards to some of what we consider baseline, we are able to offer them a solution, and we're able to do that because we're able to leverage our technology in order to sort of build up an internet footprint of the insurers. We provide them with the continuous monitoring, so if we see any exposures, if we see any vulnerabilities, we can notify them early. Okay, so essentially we're just looking to see if they have any doors and windows open and notify them before any bad guys see it, because if we can see it, so can the criminals, essentially.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, just wary of time, but before you wrap it up, I'd really like to cover this question. I think it's quite a debated question for many years, and there's still no clear answer to this. But one side of the party obviously says that you should pay, and another side says don't, because it fuels the cybercrime industry. But I would like to hear from each of the hosts what their opinion is, whether they should or should not pay ransomware, and why.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, quite interestingly, actually, this is being discussed in the Australian market right now, and it's very current there. I think they're trying to pass law, have passed law about blocking businesses from paying ransom. So it's currently being quite hotly debated down there. And as a small business owner, myself, I would, it would definitely be a hot bone of contention if I was dictated to what I can or can't do to try and rescue my business, if I need to do it. But then it all comes down to whether I've got the cash for it, or whether my insurer is going to cover me for it, but being dictated to whether or not I can or can't pay is always going to be a hotly debated subject, for sure. Just, in addition to the question there, guys, I mean, we're talking about ransom payments, and there's everyone knows what ransomware is, and paying a ransom to get your data, unencrypted and get your data returned to you. We're seeing a lot of attacks now where there's extortion payments being demanded as well, where if you don't pay this amount, we're going to release the sensitive data to the market. We're going to release the sensitive IP to the market if you don't pay. Is that changing this, or is it all falling under the same bubble of we shouldn't be paying these guys?
I can speak from our own claims data. The work that we've been doing, we've seen a significant decline in regards to our claims. The amount of our insureds that are actually paying the extortion itself. So actually, out of all of our cases, only 20% paid, where I think the market sort of stat is around about 40%. But I do think that it's worth pointing out that the decision of whether to pay a ransom or not, if this decision sits solely with the insured. You know, of course, having taken advice from the specialist aiding them in responding to the incident, but our role as an insurer is then to reimburse the company, and that reimbursement is subject to rigorous sanction checks, any applicable terms and conditions within the policy itself. And I think this coverage is readily available for insurers. But I think, you know, when it's all said and done, you know, the payment of ransoms, it's not an easy decision. It's difficult. It shouldn't be taken lightly. And I think, you know, not being able to sort of offer this service could be more detrimental than having it. I think actually the majority of these cases, these incidents, speaking to some of the forensic firms, are uninsured in the first place. So actually, the claims that we see are within the minority. So I don't see that it's feeding the criminal industry in any kind or in any way. Sorry.
I mean, I can have one final bit before I'm just extremely conscious of time. I think looking at it through the other lens, imagine you're the victim company and it's now illegal to pay a ransom. You are a company that's been trading for 150 years. It's a generational company, you know, set up by your great-great-grandparents. And now you're stuck with a $10 million ransom. You can no longer pay it, and you employ half the town. There's one example. Another example, you're a healthcare organization or you're an energy sector organization. You're crippled. People can't get power. People can't get healthcare. You know, so I just don't think the legalization of ransom payments is as clear cut as just illegalize it and there you go, and we'll all just get on with it. You know, have insurers, I'm out the market now, so I can probably pass a bit more of an opinion on it. You know, did we at the time help? Probably not, no, because it was quite clear that criminals were going after organizations that had insurance. However, that said, I think, you know, aspects like the seatbelt moment, things like that have helped the organization actually improve the overall health of every single organization. It's improved the ability to get budgets to improve cybersecurity. So it's a moving object, and it will always probably be a topic of debate for years to come.
Awesome, guys. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. That's the end of the webinar. Thank you to our host, obviously, for your time. I know you're incredibly busy, so we appreciate it. If you ever need cyber insurance advice, feel free to reach out to Simon or Sharif. And thank you so much for attending. Have a lovely day and evening, and stay safe. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.